The Atlantic wall has been penetrated. There, after the first assault, the Allies clung precariously to a few beaches. But now they have a solid foothold on Fortress Europa.
I have on the table in front of me a twin Vickers gas-operated #1 Mark 1, aka the Vickers K Gun. That was their in-house term for this thing. Two of them on a specially fabricated mount with an armour shield on the front. This setup is actually as used on SAS Jeeps in the Second World War, somewhat famously. The Vickers K Gun itself was developed as an aircraft gun, derived from the Vickers Berthier, which was a sort of a Bren-ish light machine gun with a shoulder stock and a top curved magazine and a pistol grip. Well, the Vickers sort of pivoted that to a fast-firing, 950 round per minute aircraft gun. You'll see these on, well, Blenheims off the top of my head. Anything with a flexible mount for an observer or a gunner to use. So high rate of fire, lightweight, it's always good on an aircraft as well. Reliable as well. It's one of the standard RAF and Fleet Air Arm aircraft guns of the Second World War, but it does get repurposed for other things. There's a special ground mount kit for it, so you can go Rambo with it essentially. There's the famous SAS setup, which is here. And there's something that happened on D-Day, which is why we're here with it today. Now, this was a triple mount, not a double mount. Now, if you're thinking, hang on, I only have two hands, how am I going to use three guns? Well, it gets weirder than that. So this is Pointe du Hoc. Please forgive my French pronunciation. An infamous, difficult to assault point as the Allies are assaulting the coast of Normandy. So it's a sheer cliff face, very, very tall. And if you start putting troops up ladders from amphibious vehicles, which is really the only way to do this if you're not dropping troops in, well, you can't drop all your troops in from the air, they're going to get shot to pieces by the German defenders, because as soon as they see it, as long as they know you're coming, as soon as they see anyone pop up, they're going to get shot down. So the idea was to try, they can overcome that with weight of numbers, with air support, with other methods, but one attempt was to put on the infamous General Motors DUK, DUKW, code name for the type of vehicle that it is, amphibious boat car thing, was to mount London Fire Brigade extending rescue ladders onto them and then put 3 Vickers K guns on top of that. So you would have organic firepower at the top of the cliff before anybody needed to put their head over the parapet, as it were. So there's some great test footage over at the Imperial War Museum archive of this being tested out with the DUK, with the ladders, with the triple guns, and a very bemused-looking US Army Ranger. It was 2nd Ranger Battalion, slowly hoving into view over the top of the cliff, looking very unsure of himself for obvious reasons. 3 guns. He's got 2 pointed at the imaginary enemy. One of them's just hanging in the breeze, pointing straight up, unused. Now, I have to assume the idea was reloads aren't really going to be very feasible. You've got your pan magazines, or drum magazines, times 3. And it's sort of a New York reload of you fire the outer 2, drop that, fire the middle one. There are freely pivoting up in elevation as well. So if a German sticks his head and goes, what's that coming up the cliff at me? You could point straight up and shoot him. Another reason for 3, I suppose. They don't have an armour shield. They don't have the brass catchers that we see on the aircraft installation and I think on vehicle installations. And they don't have any sights fitted, just like these don't. So in the test footage, at least, it's pure point shooting. They tried it with BARs, they tried it with Lewis guns, and they settled on the Vickers GO/K gun as the best solution. And I think it probably was. I think it's a great choice of gun for that wacky application. But on the day, there were 4 of these DUKs, all codenamed Swan, and just the one Swan made it to the bottom of the cliff. 1 sank, 2 ran aground. The other one made it, but was not on a firm footing and was moving laterally. The top of the ladder was not able to make contact with the cliff top, so it was just swaying around at the top. So the poor chap, the only poor chap who made it to the top of the cliff with this ridiculous installation, is swaying around, presumably something like this, and hitting absolutely nothing despite his very brave efforts. And that was a Sergeant Stiverson, I believe his name was, who had the dubious honour of being the only person to crest a cliff with this crazy setup. But nonetheless, that makes this type very much a D-Day weapon. If you thought this was heavy duty, or three of them, we're going to move on now to something even more heavy duty that I think we need Anthony Hopkins to introduce.
Take cover! Bring up the PIAT!
Now this is a weapon that did not debut on D-Day by any means. First introduced in February 43, arrives with the troops en masse, sort of summer 43, I gather. But it's a pretty iconic British weapon, and it comes into its own from D-Day onwards, essentially, as the Brits and others go on the attack. Now this thing is kind of known for not being very good, but in reality the PIAT, as everybody in period seems to have pronounced it, was a highly effective, or could be a highly effective weapon. In fact, you'll see this in the sources. It's nearly always caveated with, if you hit the target correctly at the right, or you get close enough. That's also a very important aspect to this. But it could absolutely knock out an enemy tank outright. We'll cover some more selling points of the PIAT as we move on. I really want to tackle out the gate, this does not throw a bomb with a great big spring. The spring absorbs the tremendous recoil of a 2.5 pound mortar bomb coming off the end of the weapon. Much like a rifle grenade, there's a reason why rifle grenades are typically fired with the butt of the rifle in the ground, because there's so much mass coming off the weapon with a stout charge to get it down range that the recoil would seriously injure you. And the same applied here. So the Major Millis Jeffries, who designed this thing, deserves more credit than he gets, let me tell you, designed this to essentially include its own giant recoil mitigation system, and the spring also recocks the striker. What am I on about with a striker? Well, this example, which by the way has been dropped on its head at some point, whether in wartime or not, we don't know. It's intact otherwise, but this has been flattened off, which means we couldn't fit a bomb to it. But the striker I'm talking about is in that tray there. And that lives, for carrying this thing around to fight the enemy with, inside the body of the weapon. I'm not going to attempt to cock this on camera. It's quite an involved process and needs some good core strength. You stand on the base plate, detach it, hoik it up till it clicks, or your back goes sprawling, and then you latch this back on. That's your butt plate as well. At which point this striker is inside the gun. They called it a gun at the time. It's not actually technically a gun either. It's not a spring catapult, and it's not a gun. It's a spigot mortar, and this is the spigot. So I'm calling it a striker. It's the spigot. It has a firing pin nubbin on the front, just like a Sten gun really. And that shoots up the back of the bomb. You can't see it. It's been removed anyway. And initiates the expelling charge, or the propelling charge, I should say. Bomb shoots off. And there are official ranges given, but the consensus seems to be 25 to 50 yards is its real effective range. Cited to 100, but yeah. Real experience showed that if you want to knock out a tank, you needed to get as close as you dared get. And then when this is, as I say, cocked, being carried around, ready for your number 2 gunner to drop a bomb into the tray, the hole in the front where the spigot is residing is plugged by a comedy cork, which always amuses me. I'm sure it amused the guys at the time as well. So that just plugs the hole and stops any mud or dirt or crud getting in the front and messing it up. They developed latterly, so initially it's like a bipod. We've now got this monopod here, which is adjustable so that you can fire at higher angles. And in fact, there's even a setting on the spirit level indirect fire sight here that's high angle, it's almost vertical. That speaks to the versatility of this system. So on D-Day, you've got a real array of different targets being engaged, not just tanks, not just armoured vehicles like half-tracks. I read an account of a gunboat being taken out with one of these things. You've got bunkers, strong points, just guys behind cover. It's a great way to just ignore any cover that someone is behind, just throw bombs over it, or into it for that matter. I also spotted a pretty remarkable story, again from D-Day, of counter-sniper use. So 7th Battalion Parachute Regiment, there was a Scottish NCO who engaged a church tower because they were being shot at by a sniper, and he just put, I think, 4 or 5 PIAT bombs into the church tower and just sort of demolished it. And they went in to check it out, and there were a dozen dead Germans in there. So whoever was sniping was at them. It probably wasn't necessarily a sniper with a scope. It's probably just one or more German soldiers engaging them from the tower. Don't know, could have been a sniper as well. Anyway, a dozen guys just taken out by this thing. So its disadvantages, weight and bulk, you know, this thing, well, not so much bulk, it's quite short, but weight. It's 32 pounds in old money, which is more than twice most of the other anti-tank weapons in use at the time. But this bomb is tremendously effective. 4.5 inches is the maximum penetration on tank armour that this thing could achieve. That's more than either of the US bazooka variants of the time. It's more than the Panzerfaust 40. Yes, the bigger Panzerfaust did a lot more than that, but they did a lot more than the bazooka as well. Rate of fire of 4 to 5 rounds per minute with your assistant gunner on this thing, which is more than the M1 bazooka. So when this was introduced in February 43, it was one of the best anti-tank weapons available. Big downside for the troops is you've got to get so close. 25 yards away from a Tiger tank. Famously, these things were used to engage Tigers. Is pretty terrifying. And I've also read an account of a guy that tried to get close enough to engage a tank. They spotted, turret traversed, and it blew half his face off, was the actual quote. There's some amazing accounts on the Imperial War Museum Sound Archive, if you'd like to steel yourself and listen to any of those. But many other accounts of guys successfully, at least mobility killing a Tiger. You could take a Tiger out of the action and then have an anti-tank artillery piece or something finish it off. In theory, if you got it right up the back, you could take one out outright with a PIAT. Maybe the ultimate account from D-Day is Pegasus Bridge. A lot more successful than the scene depicted in the Bridge Too Far, different bridge, but nonetheless. It's from Major John Howard, who's the commanding officer of D Company, 2nd Battalion, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. And he talks about a forward platoon with a PIAT. He says assembled. The thing is kind of already assembled. So I think he just means with a bomb loaded and cocked. And he talks about a Sergeant Thornton who did the classic PIAT gunner thing of getting as close as he dared risk it in order to try and guarantee a hit. After all, if you fire too soon and miss, or the bomb doesn't hit square to initiate the penetrating jet, that high explosive anti-tank heat Monroe effect, it just bounces off. So you either have no effect or you have crippling effect. So the CO was about to order the troops to go in with grenades, anti-tank grenades, gammon bombs probably, to take out this tank. And this lone PIAT gunner got his firing solution in his head, as it were, squeezed the trigger and just took the tank out outright. So that one weapon, that one hit, taking out that German tank, that convinces the Germans that there's a proper anti-tank weapon, if you like, an anti-tank artillery there that's going to just pick off their vehicles as they try to come over the bridge one at a time. And so that turns the tide of that battle at the bridge. So it's quite a rare instance, actually, of one shoulder weapon turning the tide like that. It's very rare that ever happens. Okay, so from a rate of 4 to 5 rounds per minute, let's go to 1,200 plus rounds per minute with another iconic D-Day weapon. Well, I'm sure you knew it was coming. Can't do a video about firearms on D-Day and not talk about the iconic German MG42. What can I say that hasn't been said many times, but yeah, the reputation of this thing is well deserved on one level, arguably overhyped on another. Discuss. But in this context, on D-Day, on the beaches, in a defensive role, a powerful, relatively accurate, very fast firing machine gun in a pokey rifle caliber like 7.92 by 57 was kind of ideal. So this gun is currently in the light role. It's on its bipod. This is how it would be used in an assault, an advance. It's missing, of course, a belt of ammunition to make it work. In the sustained fire role or defensive role on its Lafette tripod, or even in a pinch rested on a parapet on some sandbags or something, this thing is a sort of, it doesn't get much better for defensive machine gunnery than this, unless you want sustained fire over time, in which case you want a water-cooled Maxim or something. But water-cooled Maxims don't do 1,200 rounds per minute, which is pretty much what all of the MG42 variants either do or can run at, depending on which weight bolt is fitted to them. So a lot of misconceptions about rate of fire of MG42 versus the modern descendant. It's all the same for combat purposes. The same bolt is used, the same weight bolt. It's 1,200 rounds per minute, literally twice what a Bren gun or a Vickers gun does. So this is why this thing becomes iconic. And I think not all of its reputation, the Italian campaign, it becomes pretty famous there as well. But a lot of its reputation comes from veterans facing this thing and seeing their friends cut down by it on D-Day. So in lieu of that water-cooled barrel of old, we still have water-cooled guns in the Second World War, of course, but this thing's more flexible. We have this ventilated body, receiver, and we have a replaceable barrel. So let me quickly demonstrate how that works. Out it pops. You've got a nice asbestos glove that I don't thankfully have to deal with. Hand that off, or your assistant gunner takes that off you, inserts a nice cool barrel, and with a little bit of difficulty on my part, we get that back in. Obviously, they were pretty slickly drilled to get those swapped out. So you don't wait for it to be red hot to do that, unless, of course, I don't know, the combined forces of multiple enemy nations are attacking you all at once. Ideally, you would do that to preserve barrel life every couple of hundred rounds, something like that. In such a pinch as German soldiers found themselves on D-Day, you might well be shooting this thing until it really does glow red hot and steam or smoke, like we see in that infamous scene in Saving Private Ryan, which really does, that again has catapulted the reputation of this weapon into the stratosphere for another generation or two. So maybe the ultimate story from D-Day for this thing is that of Heinrich Seeverloh, who was a German soldier behind an MG42 on Omaha Beach, based in Widerstandsnest 62, so one of the strong points strung out across the 5 miles of Omaha Beach. And he claimed in his memoir in 2000 that he killed between 1,000 and 2,000 American troops. That is highly contested, because if that were the story, is this one man is holding off half the Allied army. Now this matters, of course, both as a matter of pure fact, but also because if he really did kill up to 2,000 Allied soldiers, well, only 2,400 died on Omaha Beach. Only, forgive me for saying that. which would mean that Heinrich was a one-man army. So it kind of doesn't do anyone any favours on either side if that's not true. But that is what he claimed, and he's almost a sort of microcosm of this myth of the German soldier with the MG42 mowing down American soldiers. There's truth to it for sure, but there's an awful lot more going on. Otherwise, the Allies would never have triumphed on D-Day. So the debate over whether this thing is some sort of wonder weapon or just a decent machine gun, especially versus the British Bren gun, is going to rumble on regardless of what I say about it. But we do and have to recognise that certainly the Allied soldiers on the day and throughout the war when this thing was introduced absolutely did regard it as extremely dangerous and extremely effective. So it is iconic and infamous for good reason. If it was ever truly a standout compared to any other firearm of the conflict, it's going to be on D-Day, where it has the ultimate ability to lay down high rates of fire, interlocking fields of fire, and be the best machine gun it can be, essentially. So how do you counter devastating rapid-fire weapons like this? Well, you break out the large explosive weapons. So over to my colleagues at Fort Nelson for the next weapon.
Welcome to the Royal Armouries at Fort Nelson here near Portsmouth. Artillery played an important role in the invasion of Normandy and the D-Day landings. Artillery was needed in an anti-aircraft form once they were on the beaches to defend against potential air threat. It was needed in a medium form, which was to fire against German artillery that was further back from the beaches, bombarding the beaches. But also it took part in the initial landings. Prior to the main assault, there was a heavy bombardment from sea and air of the German defences. But that had to be paused in order for the troops to land successfully on the beaches, not under their own fire. But in order to keep some fire onto the German defences, Sextons and also other self-propelled guns and tanks landing on the landing craft were involved in what was called a run-in-shoot. This is where the guns behind me, such as the Sexton, actually fired from the landing craft coming in. The landing craft carrying the Sexton then broke away and curved around behind and then followed the infantry in again behind. After the First World War, warfare had become more mechanised and artillery was required to keep up with the infantry. At this time, most artillery guns were towed and dug in, which took time. And as soon as they fired, they were vulnerable to counter battery or counter enemy fire coming in. Self-propelled guns such as the Sexton were developed early in the Second World War, but continually needed to improve to counter German armour. They all had ecclesiastical names, so the first was the bishop, then the deacon, and then finally the sexton. And then post-war, we then went on to the abbot. Unfortunately, the main air and sea bombardment, many of the German defences were actually covering across the beach. So they were firing sideways along the beaches, meaning their both defensive side was facing the fleet out at sea. It was therefore almost impossible to knock out these guns. So the Sexton was then key, once it had landed, to actually knocking out German bunkers. And one such action took place on Gold Beach, where Sergeant Palmer of the 147th Essex Yeomanry received the military medal when he and his crew knocked out a German bunker that had already destroyed 6 Allied tanks coming off the beaches. He broke many rules in doing this. The gun was actually loaded prior to moving, and he tapped his driver on the shoulder when he was ready to fire. The driver slammed on the brakes and turned at 45 degrees and fired straight through the German bunker. And now back to the Royal Armouries in Leeds.
Thanks, Richard. But let's take a look at another really important artillery piece.
Welcome to the Royal Armouries, Fort Nelson. Once the Allies had made landfall and secured their landing sites, their next problem was the inevitable German counterattack, spearheaded by the fearsome Panzer divisions. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the Allies were deploying their anti-tank artillery as preparation for this armoured attack. The Americans sent in their M10 tank destroyer, a self-propelled gun, while the British and the Canadians fielded 2, the 6-pounder gun and this, the Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder gun. Throughout the Second World War, tank and anti-tank engineers were locked in a battle of armour versus penetration. The 17-pounder gun was designed to destroy the heaviest German armoured vehicles. Armed with its state-of-the-art Sabot round, the 17-pounder could penetrate 172mm of solid steel at a distance of 900 metres. That's over double the armour of the German Panther tank at 80mm. In fact, the Allies were so eager to get their hands on this gun's firepower that the earliest versions of these, fielded in February 1943, were mounted on 25-pounder carriages. The Allies couldn't wait to get their hands on this gun's power, and at an average rate of fire of 10 rounds per minute and a maximum of 20 rounds per minute, who can blame them? This gun appeared in a variety of different forms on D-Day, both tank and self-propelled versions. If you've heard of the American Sherman Firefly tank or the M10 Achilles, those are both armoured vehicles upgraded with the 17-pounder gun. What you're seeing behind me is the bog-standard towed version, pulled by obsolete Crusader tanks to protect the crews from bullets and shrapnel. The anti-tank artillery on D-Day was predominantly on defence, so that the 17-pounder tanks could keep on the offence and keep pushing inland. Due to the sheer size and weight of this gun, it would take its 6-man crew 12 hours just to dig it in. So while the lighter 6-pounder and the self-propelled 17s would act as a mobile forward line of defence, the towed 17-pounders would act as long stop, an inner line of defence to repel any German armoured attack. Now, as it happened, the feared German counterattack was not as swift or as severe as we might have thought. Due to some clever Allied deception work and some division within German high command, only one Panzer division, the 21st, was within striking distance of the beaches on the 6th of June. They made their counterattack at 16:20 p.m. and faced off against the Staffordshire Yeomanry and the Shropshire Light Infantry. In the battle that followed, they managed to destroy 13 tanks with their 17-pounders before the arrival of the 6th Airborne at 9 o'clock forced the Germans to retreat to protect their rear. With the firepower of these guns, the Allies could beat off the initial threat and secure the beaches for the inland push. That's all from us down on the south coast. Back to Leeds.
Thanks, Tom. We're now going to throw over to our friends at IWM, specifically at HMS Belfast, which was involved in one of the most important phases of the D-Day landings, the shore bombardment.
Welcome to HMS Belfast, one of the nation's great surviving D-Day veterans. Belfast was launched in 1939 and saw action throughout the Second World War. D-Day was central to Belfast's Second World War experience, and its guns were an integral part of the naval bombardment on that auspicious day. The Germans laid out their defences in 3 waves. There were the mines in the sea, there were the beach defences themselves, and the bigger gun batteries that covered the beaches. The naval guns were tasked with engaging this 3rd layer, the big gun batteries that protected and engaged the beach. However, naval guns are not suited to engaging targets on land. The trajectory of a naval gun is very flat, whereas to engage a target on land you need more of a howitzer trajectory, climbing up in the air and falling down. So it was understood from the beginning in the naval orders that they were not going to destroy the targets. It was sufficient through their weight and power just to hit them and concuss and knock out the gunners and put them out of action. This is precisely what happened to HMS Belfast on the 6th of June. Belfast was tasked with engaging one specific target, the German gun battery at La Marefontaine. Belfast's primary armament are 12 6-inch guns arranged in 4 gun turrets. At 5:27, Belfast opened fire with a full broadside. That's all 12 guns firing at once. The story goes that so powerful was the broadside that the toilets on HMS Belfast cracked. Belfast gunfire continued for 10 minutes, then paused for around another 10 minutes, then began again for 10 minutes, and then paused. And this is the pattern it continued for 2 hours. And in this way, Belfast wasn't able to destroy the gun battery, but it landed its shells sufficiently accurately to knock it out of action and stop the gunners from firing. And when the 7th Battalion of the Green Howards landed during the day and moved through the village of Vers-sur-Mer and reached La Marefontaine, they recorded in their war diary that the gun battery had been put out of action and 50 prisoners were taken. And this is precisely down to the accurate and systematic gunfire put down on La Marefontaine by HMS Belfast on the 6th of June.
Thanks as always for watching, guys. A little bit of a different approach from us here, collaborating with our friends at IWM. But I think it's useful and interesting to come at this subject from that sort of thematic angle, because we can look at more than one weapon at once and we can really get a picture of what some of the highlights, as it were, some of the weapons that are iconic, that are very significant and made a significant contribution, and even on occasion that could turn the tide of a battle. And that can come down sometimes to just the one weapon and the one person, which is pretty remarkable when that happens. So as ever, please do check out our website, our brick and mortar museums here in the UK. Definitely check out our partners' History of Weapons and War. So you can watch our content there without advertisements, which is nice. But it's all the same content from us. And a number of partners who, well, friends really, people we've been working with for years in various different ways, who cover, weapons and war in very interesting ways. So please do see if that's something you would like to sign up for. There's also our Royal Armouries membership programme, which gives you various benefits, including sort of behind the scenes access of different types. So again, check out the website for more information on that. But we'll see you here on this channel next week.
We are incredibly proud to be hosting D-Day A Portsmouth Story, a special exhibition on the local memories and voices of the 5th and 6th of June 1944.
Come and visit. We're free admission and learn more on our website.